Hi, I'm Selina from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Michael Mammay, who is a science fiction writer. And for readers unfamiliar with your work, how would you describe what you write?
I kind of write like noir detective stories set in a military science fiction environment. So my first novel was Planetside. It's a series of 3 books, and it's about a aging colonel who gets sent to do these investigations. So it's a first person. It's told in the first person. Kind of has a noir feel for it from the old detective stories and those kinds of things. But it's very much set in a military setting.
Uh-huh. And you were in the military yourself, I hear.
I was in the Army for 27 years. There's a lot of that baked into these books. I don't talk too much about it, but again, it's in that setting. So he's operating in a world in which I'm very familiar.
Uh-huh. So, what can readers expect from your newest book, which I believe is Colonyside?
Colonyside, yeah, that's the 3rd book in the series. The first 2 books kind of went together. It was like it's not part 1 and part 2, but kind of part 1A and part 1B of a very similar storyline where he's pursuing a mystery in book 1, and then that mystery kind of comes back around in book 2. In book 3, it's the same characters, same main character, but he's kind of off onto a completely different mission. The residue of what happened in book 1 and book 2 is still there, but book 3 is a standalone book. I do recommend reading book 1 and book 2 first, but you could actually pick up book 3, Colonyside, and read it straight through without losing too much, other than the characters and what happened. In book 3, he does refer back to some, I don't want to spoil, but some big events from books 1 and 2. He refers back to them, but he does explain enough for you to go on from there in just book 3.
Okay. What do you think draws readers to these types of books?
I think the voice is one. I think Carl Butler he's not a superhero. Okay. He's a very regular guy. He's an older main character, kind of down at the end of his career that he had a good career, but not a spectacular career. He's not going to go beat anybody up or do any kind of magic things. He's just using his experience and his time in the service and the things that he's learned to get to the bottom of what's going on. And it's a very realistic feeling kind of thing, because you don't ever feel like he could do anything special. He's just out there kind of trying to figure out what's going on. And in the first book, he's trying to find a missing person. And then again, in the 3rd book, he's also trying to find a different missing person. And then book 2 is kind of different than that. But
So what was your inspiration for Colonyside?
for Colonyside, this is not going to sound good. My inspiration was that they gave me a contract that said, "Hey, would you like to write book 3? We'll pay you some money." Sorry, if you're one of those people who believes in like the purity of the arts, then sorry about that. But the story of book 3 was that we're all a product of what we've been through. And by books 1 and 2, Carl Butler, who's the main character, Colonel Carl Butler, retired by book 3. What he's been through is a lot. Okay, front page of the news kind of stuff. Let's just say that. I don't really want to say what happens in book 1 because a lot of people watching this probably haven't read it, and I wouldn't want to ruin that. But a lot happens in book 1 and book 2 that make him a well-known name. He's somebody who, if you saw his name and you were in that world, you would recognize it. And you would have an opinion about him. It would be either very positive or very negative, depending maybe where you fell on the political spectrum. So everybody has an opinion about him, but he doesn't see himself that way because he's moved past that stuff. Because it's in the past. It's, the events of Planetside are 4 years past by the time Colonyside comes around. And he's grown since then and developed and become a new person. But other people don't know that. they know what they've seen of him in the news, which is, in our world, the news is one-sided. Regardless of which side you're on, when you watch the news, you're getting a set of opinions. You're getting some facts, but you're getting a set of opinions. And that world is the same. People believe different things about him, but those people don't necessarily believe what he believes about himself. And so book 3 is really a conflict between those things. There are people who expect him to be a certain thing, a certain way, and act a certain way. So they put him into situations based on what they think, but he's no longer that person. And that's where the conflict of book 3 comes from. And also he's looking for a missing person on a colony world, which is why it's called Colonyside. It's a world that's not finished yet. You can't breathe outside the domes. It's a jungle. They're in a jungle area, and there's wild flora and fauna from that planet that he has to deal with as well. So there's some very, very straightforward conflicts in it. And then there's some more convoluted and complex conflicts lying underneath it.
And what was actually the inspiration for your first book? I mean, how did that come about?
Yeah, Planetside came about from a page and a half of notes that I wrote for myself while I was serving in Afghanistan. And I was on a base called Kandahar in Afghanistan. And the command structure at the base was really, really weird. You had like an army general who was in charge of a lot. And then you had an Air Force officer who was in charge of the air wing that was there. And you had a hospital commander who was in charge of a hospital. And you had special forces people who were in charge of special forces. And they didn't work for each other. And I just remember at the time thinking, this is not a great way to run a war. Now, what happened in reality is all those people are really good. They're great professionals. And they made it work. And they worked together and they cooperated and everything worked well. But I had this thought of, well, what if they didn't? And that became the setting for Planetside, is this really dysfunctional base set on a planet far away from the rest of the world, rest of the galaxy. It's out on the edge of the galaxy, and something happens there, and everybody is not working for the same purposes. There are different people and different commands working for different purposes. And I just had that idea in my head, and that was that. I didn't have a plot or anything for it. I just had this idea of a place like that. And that becomes the setting for Planetside. Which was not a book I ever really intended to write. But then I started reading Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. And if you've read that, just the first chapter, the voice of that character in there. And I'm like, that's it. I got to write this I was writing in third person at the time. And I'm like, I got to write this in first person. I got to write this story. And I just started writing it. I sent like maybe a chapter or two off to a couple of readers, and they were like, yeah, give us more of this. This is the best thing you've written. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And like 9 weeks later, I had the draft done. It just came out pretty quick.
Mm-hmm. And so what were the rest of the steps that you took to bring it to the finished product?
Well, I write a lot of drafts. So for me, I write a first draft and a second draft on my own. And then I start with readers, and I usually do 2 to 3 rounds of readers. And I've kind of honed that over time because I've gotten better readers as I've gone along. I had some very good readers for the first book. And then for Planetside, I actually entered a contest called Pitch Wars, which I now mentor in. But I entered a contest called Pitch Wars, where they pair you up. If you get in, it's very competitive. Like, 3 out of people out of 100 get in. So it's very competitive. You have to be very good. You have to be at a good place to get in. Not to say that I'm very good, but I mean, you have to be in a very good spot to get in. And they pair you up with a published author. And that author helps you further develop the book. And I was paired up with Dan Cobalt. And he and I are still good friends. This was 2015 when that happened, but we're still good friends. He's got a book out from Bain that just came out in January that I helped him work on. And actually, there's a blurb by me on the cover of it. So it's really cool. So he and I still kind of work together. But that was kind of how I went. And then I went out and I just started querying agents. And I signed with Lisa Rogers out of Jabberwocky Literary. They represent some people you might have heard of. Brandon Sanderson, Charlene Harris, a couple of those people. They're small names. And then I got on with them, and then they sold my book to Harper.
We interviewed, or I interviewed Dan, actually.
Did you?
Yeah, we have an interview with him on
oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So what kind of research went into writing your books?
Absolutely none.
None.
Absolutely none. I make everything up. Okay. And it's told in the first person. So I only have to know as much science as Carl Butler knows. And Carl Butler is a soldier. He doesn't know any science, so I don't explain anything. It's not an overwhelming science fiction book. I've had a lot of non-science fiction fans. My dad, for one, said, well, I don't like science fiction, but I like this, because it's really not heavy science fiction. And if you're a super hardcore science fiction, if you like Arthur Clarke, or if Reynolds or those, then this may not be for you. I mean, it's not heavy in the science fiction part. It's more in the character, the military, and the world building. The world that he lives in, that operates in.
So you don't really have any favorite research stories then?
I've been researching the book that I'm writing now, which
Tell
is
us a little about that.
Oh, well. So it's weird because this is actually book 5 that I'm working on now. Book 4 is already turned into the editor. And that's not a Planetside book. It's currently called Misfits, although that title may not make it through. It's not looking good for that title. And my editor is working on that book right now, and he's going to get that back to me. And I'm working on a 5th book called The Weight of Command. And a pivotal scene takes place on a space elevator. So over the last day or two, I've really, really been digging into how a space elevator works. And yesterday I was researching, if you blew somebody out, how high could you be up a space elevator where you blow somebody out of it, where they could theoretically skydive to Earth or to the planet, which there's no good answer for that. But if you're watching this and you know the answer to that, feel free to let me know, because I'd really like to talk to you.
So that's a good question. What was the biggest challenge in writing and putting out Colonyside?
Well, for me, the hardest part about Colonyside had nothing to do with books and everything to do with the world. I received my edit letter. The draft that I turned in for Colonyside was not ready. I thought it was ready, but then I got my editor's notes on it, and it was going to require me to rewrite about 60% of it, maybe a little more, which is fine. And he gave me a month, which is okay. That's within my capability. But this was March of 2020 when this happened. Okay. And I was a teacher. So in the same week that happened, that I got that edit letter, we shifted from teaching in person to teaching at home, which, if you know any teachers who had to do that, they will tell you that first couple of months, really that whole quarter of last year, was really, really hard. I mean, it's still hard. Everybody who's teaching in this environment right now is doing yeoman's work. I mean, it's just impressive. It's hard. But I was teaching high school. I was teaching literature in high school, and we shifted right as I was supposed to be revising my book. So that was hard. That was really the biggest challenge. It was nothing to do with the writing or any of that. Writing wise, it was a more complicated plot than the first 2 books. So that's why it needed so much work, is because some of the pieces weren't fitting together the way. Once my editor pointed that out, I was able to see it. I just did not see it when I drafted it.
And how did you overcome the problems?
You sit down and write. I mean, you just got to do it. I got a week extension. So he gave me a month. I took an extra week. And then we had to do another round after that, which I've never really had to do before. So he came back after that because the edit was so, I mean, to put this in perspective, my edit on Planetside was probably 5%. Okay. And now it was 60%. And I got most of it right. I think the reviewers say I got it right. So, the readers seem to appreciate it. The people who like book 1 and book 2 also like book 3. So that's always a good sign. But yeah, I don't have an answer. It was a very high stress time.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
So what character did you love or hate the most, and why?
I think my favorite character of all time is Colonel Elliot, the doctor from Planetside. And the reason I like her is because she wasn't supposed to be an important character. She was never really supposed to be in the book. She was supposed to be in like one scene. She was the commander of the hospital in Planetside, and Colonel Butler, the main character, was going to go in there and talk to her, and he was going to kind of bully her a little bit and get the information that he needed to move forward on his case. But he got in there, and I don't pre-draft scenes. I write scenes by putting the characters in the room together, and then they kind of write the scene themselves. And each character acts in their own interest, and in her interest happened to be, hey, I'm a colonel too, and I've been doing this for a long time. And if you don't like it, get the hell out of my hospital. And that's really how, and she didn't say hell. That's how the chapter ends, which made me think like, wait a minute, she must know something that she's not telling, which got me thinking about what it is. And then that became the whole plot of the book. I mean, that character becomes integral to the book. I mean, she's a really important character. I don't really want to give too much away because it's a mystery. But she's an important character, and she wasn't supposed to be, which makes her a lot of fun to me. And obviously I like writing Carl Butler. He's fun. He's the main character. He's great. There's a character called Ganos, who is a tech head. She's the computer hacker who we meet briefly in book 1, but has a main role in book 2 and book 3. And she's just I don't give a care about anything, that's nice that you're a colonel, but I don't really care. She's got some attitude to her. I like writing her. And then there's a guy who's in book 1 who I didn't have in book 2. His name is Mac. He's Butler's bodyguard. And he's a lot of fun to write in book 3. Like in book 3, he's like staring a guy down while he's in the hospital. Mac is in the hospital on a bed, like strapped up to a bunch of machines. And the guy is like giving him crap, like, you're in a bed, you can't do anything. And Mac rips his own IV out of his arm and decides he's coming after the guy. So he's a lot of fun to write too. I have some characters that I like to write.
So you're a panter, in other words. Yeah, right.
I am not. I am both. I'm in the middle. I pants my scenes for sure, but I definitely plot out the books. I'm very structure oriented. There's going to be a midpoint. There's going to be first act conclusion. I mean, there's going to be, the beats are going to be there in the story for me. But what happens between them is anybody's guess. I mean, in the book I'm writing called Misfits, that the 4th book, my squad gets held up by an 84-year-old lady. I mean, a mechanized infantry squad gets basically stopped by an 84-year-old lady, which I didn't have any plan for that scene, and it just happened. It's my favorite scene in the book, so I hope I get to keep it. We'll see. My editor's working on it right now.
Wow. So that kind of answers my next question is what else can we expect from you in the future?
My 4th book is called Misfits. It's also from Harper Voyager. It's scheduled, we don't have an exact release date, but I'm told February of 2022 it'll be out, which seems pretty realistic since the book's mostly done. I felt really good about the draft I turned in, and I should get that back next week. So it's on schedule for that. It should be out in 2022. And then the book right after that is actually an Audible original. It's not with Harper, it's with Audible. So it'll come out in audiobook only.
Wow.
So for 6 months, and then there'll be a print version 6 months after. So yeah, that's a thing. So audio is a huge growing market. I'm narrated by R.C. Bray. He did a little book called The Martian. If you might have heard that one. He's done a couple.
David Gerald.
What's that?
Oh, okay. Not The Martian Child. The Martian.
Yeah, Andy Weir. Although it's since been re-recorded by Will Wheaton. But anyway, it's interesting because R.C. Bray had narrated The Martian, which was the first audiobook I ever listened to. And I was listening to it as I wrote Planetside. So I wrote the book with R.C. Bray's voice in mind for the character. And then I was able to get him to be my narrator. So the audiobook. So
you had a say in who did your audiobooks?
I asked up front, when I signed for the book, I said, hey, can we get this guy? And they just emailed me one day and said, here are your 3 choices. And he was one of them. And I emailed them back like 15 seconds later. I didn't even listen to the samples. I'm like, I want R.C. Bray.
Wow. Wonderful.
Yeah, that's normal. It's normal that you'll get 3 choices. So authors do get some say in that. It depends on your publisher. But I definitely had a say.
Wonderful. Okay. I'm now going to ask you a couple of questions about being a writer.
Sure.
What's your favorite part of being a writer on the whole writing and publishing process?
The writing part? I mean, the great part is like, you know, I rarely wear pants. You know, I wear pajamas all day. I don't ever have to leave. I can do whatever I want. I'm very free. There's so many parts of it that I really like. I really like revision more than I like drafting. For me, a draft is something to get through. I got to get through the draft and then I can turn it into the book. You know, and I'm not afraid, even in my own revisions, I'm not afraid to rip up 20,000 words and rewrite them in a different way if I think that's what it needs. And I usually will in my revisions, you know, change a lot. And I think I'm better at that part than the drafting part. And I really I'll enjoy that process of taking a book apart and then putting it back together, either my own books or other people's too. When I read for someone like Dan, you know, I'll help him do that too. And he does it for me. He helps me do it with mine. But I really enjoy that part of the writing. I love meeting and talking to fans. The great part about book 3 for me was there are people who wanted it. Like when book 1 comes out, nobody knows who you are. You're throwing it out there in the world. You hope somebody's going to like it. But literally nobody other than my mom, you know, on release day, there's nobody waiting for that book because they don't know. And with book 2, it had built a little bit. But by the time book 3 came around, I kind of had some dedicated readers, you know, who are going to buy whatever I write next. And just having those people out there and having them like react on day 1 is just a lot of fun. I mean, and getting to talk to them and stuff like that in different, you know, online forums, hopefully at conventions live again one day. It's just that part of it's a lot of fun. You know, and then just dreaming and coming up with ideas. I have like 5 books in my notebook. Like they're like 1 paragraph ideas right now, but I have like 5 books I want to write. And I almost want this one to be done so I can start on the next one. And that's partially this. I'm really struggling with the one I'm writing now. So that if you want my least favorite part of it, it's this book right here that I'm writing, my 5th book. It's just killing me.
Have you ever thought of like putting that aside and doing the next one and then coming back to it?
Yeah, I don't want to send the check back.
Oh,
I'm bound to write this book in a very, very legally binding way.
I see.
Yeah, I have a contract. I have a contract for it. They pay me some money up front to write it. And and I would have to send that money back if I didn't write it. And honestly, it's almost done. I mean, it's got like 76,000 words in it. It's probably a 90,000 word book. I'm going to finish it here in the next, 2 weeks, probably, the draft.
Oh, wow.
And then I'm on to the revision, which I like. I got to get through the draft. I figured a whole bunch of stuff out yesterday about the space elevator and how I'm going to deal with that. So I think I'm ready to write the climax, which is the fun part. Everything's about to blow up. It'll be fun.
So what do you consider the most challenging part of the writing process? And how do you overcome that?
It's this part. It's when it's not working. When it's not working, when there's something wrong with a story, and it gets hard to finish. And that's been my problem with this book, is that there's something gloriously wrong with it somewhere. And the second quarter, like the first quarter, the first act is good. There's something in the first half of the second act that's not right. And I'm not 100% sure what it is, but it's really messing up the rest of the book, which makes it hard to finish the draft because whatever I write now is not going to make sense. So you kind of have to either go back and do it. And that way lies madness. Because if you go fix it now, before you write the end, then you could be back in the same spot 4 weeks from now. Whereas if I can power through and write the end, what I write at the end is going to tell me a lot of what needed to happen back there to make the end work, right? So if I can write a good ending, I can then go back and fix the middle to make it match the ending. But when you're caught in that spot right where I am right now, in between those two things, where you don't have a good ending yet, and you don't really have anything to base your ending on that you're happy with, then that gets confusing. Do you go back and rewrite? And I think a lot of authors, I was talking to a really famous author about it, a few weeks back, and she was in the same, she's got like 30, I'm not going to give you her name, but she's got like 30, 35 books, regular bestseller. And she was the same way. She was like, do I go back and rewrite, the second act, or do I finish it? And so we had a good talk about that. And it actually helped me kind of think about it for myself too.
Mm-hmm. So what has been your favorite adventure during your writing career?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't had a lot of adventures. I'm kind of an introvert. I don't go out a lot. I guess, I probably something really basic. Seeing my book on sale somewhere. Having somebody know who I am based on my book. Oh yeah, here's one. It's really small, but I was moving some money from one investment company to another, and I needed help from the investment advisor, right? And so he gets me on the phone. And he's like, Michael Mammay, is that how you say it? And he's going through all this stuff, and he's like, wait, are you the author? I'm like, what are the odds that this guy who knows that? And he just happened to, somebody had just recommended my book to him. So little things like that are really, I don't have any big adventures. I got to go on a really cool learning experience. There's this thing called Launchpad. And a couple of astrophysicists, PhDs, one of them works out of the University of Wyoming. Every year, they bring in about 12 or 15 science fiction authors, and they teach you real science. And their idea is that to get real science into books. So they want you to write better science in your science fiction books. And to do that, they bring you in there for a week with a bunch of other authors, and you get to look through telescopes, and they tell you how orbits work, and all kinds of stuff like that. So that was pretty cool.
Great. So what's the greatest lesson you've learned thus far in your writing career?
Oh, I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm not good at lessons. The greatest lesson. I probably should have thought this through. The greatest lesson, I don't really have anything. I mean, there are so many little lessons, of how to do something.
Well, that's okay.
I guess the biggest lesson that everybody has to learn as a writer is it's not going to write itself.
That's a good one.
It really is, because you talk to, every writer obviously knows that. But there's a lot of people who are out there and think, I should write a novel. And a lot of them don't, and they never will. But, if you think you should write it, go ahead and write it. And then probably the other lesson is it's not as easy as you think. And you got, the first book I wrote is complete and utter garbage. You will never see it. It doesn't exist, as far as some scholars think it doesn't even exist. It's not a published book. It will never be seen. But I learned a lot from it. So that's probably the biggest lesson, was learning what you're not good at. And then going and figuring out how to do it. Get in the resources. The structure of that book was so wrong, and I didn't know how to structure a book. So, between writing that book and writing Planetside, I sat down, online with some resources of book structure, and just Google books, novel structure, and start reading. And there's a whole bunch of different ideas about it. And you don't have to follow any one idea, but you do have to know what it is. You have to follow some structure. And people say, oh, I just don't write with structure. I don't. If you're one of those people and you can do structure without thinking about it, that's great. But you have to have it. You have it. You just don't know it, because it's not something you do it inherently, which is great for you if you can do that. I could not. I have to think about it.
I think that's a perfect lesson. I think that's wonderful. So what piece of advice would you want to share with other authors? I mean, I think that's a great one.
The most important thing for other authors is you can't do it by yourself. I'm sure that there is a unicorn out there who could sit down and write books all by themselves and they turn out perfect. I'm sure that person exists. I'm quite sure it's not me. Okay. And it's probably not you. The way you get better is to get around other professionals. Okay. Other people who are writing seriously. And I don't mean that they have to be published. I don't mean that I'm not saying they have to have an agent. They just have to be serious about it and taking the craft seriously and trying to get better. Because as I was learning, the people who I was working with, the other writers who were in my group at the time, were also working, and one of us would learn something and do it better and share it with the other people. And then we all got better. And two of those authors have published books now. None of us had published books when we started. And now three of us do. So, so you learn together, and you help each other get better. There were things I wasn't good at. And I found readers who pointed stuff like other writers. Your mom is not a good reader for you. Okay. She's just not. She loves you too much. You need someone who doesn't like you to read your book and tell you what they think about it. Okay. Or doesn't care about your feelings one way or the other. You need objective criticism in order to get better. And the only people who can give that to you are other writers. Or really, really sophisticated readers, but that is a lot more rare than you think.
And are there any groups or clubs or organizations that you would recommend to other writers who help you in your career?
This is a really hard question. I get this question a lot, actually, because I give that advice and then someone's like, that's great. Where do I find those people?
Yes.
It's hard. It's hard. You're going to kiss some frogs before you get a prince, maybe, once the pandemic's over, writers groups, local writers groups, if you have them, sometimes organized through your library, sometimes through bookstores, even, a local writers group where you can do that. There are a lot of writing competitions and contests and things like that online. Pitch Wars is a huge one, probably the biggest one. It's called Pitch Wars, and you can Google it. It's pitchwars.org, and they do that once a year. But a lot of writers, even if they don't get in, because it's such a big event, I mean, with 4,000 writers entering, I think this year, and about 100 getting in, there's still a whole bunch of people around the periphery of that who are looking for the same thing you're looking for. So sometimes you can meet people there. Conventions, especially writer-based ones, are going to be better than fan cons for meeting other writers. Writers workshops in your area. Again, once the pandemic is passed, and we can go to those things, because you'll get a couple of pro authors in there. I teach at one down in Florida, but you'll get a whole bunch of aspiring pro authors, who are at the same place you are, and want the same things you are, and maybe you can meet somebody that way and kind of, get help that way.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard. So, but stick with it. It's worth it.
Okay, now I've got some questions about you as a person.
Okay.
What is one thing that most people don't realize about you?
I'm pretty open about everything. Most people don't recognize that I'm a grandfather when they first meet me, which there's a reason for that. Biologically, I'm not. I have step grandkids who are my grandkids. My wife's grandkids. But I have a 7-year-old and a almost 4-year-old granddaughters.
Wow. And what question do you wish interviewers would ask you, and what would your answer be?
I mean, you can see from this interview, I'll talk about anything.
I can tell.
I love to talk about books, especially with booksellers. I love to talk about science fiction books, some fantasy, a lot of science fiction. I love to talk about it. Now, when we start talking about it with most people, someone will say, "Hey, tell me some good science fiction books I should read." And I will immediately say, "Are you sure you're ready for this conversation?" Because science fiction readers are such a diverse group of people. And I don't mean that in a diverse, hashtag diverse kind of way. I mean, what people like in science fiction is just, it's huge. There is a group of science fiction readers who don't want to read anything that was written after 1980. Okay, they exist, and there are a lot of them, and I don't want to talk to them. I just don't. I'm sorry. That's great. I respect your opinion, and if that's what you love, you should go read that. But I'm not going to talk about it. I've read the books. I know them. But the idea that all good science fiction ended in the 80s is ridiculous to me. It's ridiculous. I mean, if you read some of the brilliant stuff that's coming out now, like Lecky and Jemison and these people who are writing these fantastic science fiction, and you don't recognize the brilliance in that, that's okay. But we can't talk about it because that's what I read. I try to read books from the last 2 to 3 years, stay up with the genre. So I've always got a recommendation, depending, if you come up and say, "Hey, I'd really like a good military science fiction book that I had never read. What do you got?" I loved it. That's a great question. Cry Pilot by Joel Dane. Read that. It's fantastic. You probably haven't even heard of it, but it's amazing. So, it came out in 2019 from Daw. There's a whole trilogy of them. They're great, and I love to talk about books.
Okay, so my next question is, what are your passions when you're not writing, and how do you make time for your non-writing hobbies and things?
I actually have I have a lot of time. When you're a full-time writer, I don't know anyone who writes for 8 hours a day. I mean, maybe somebody's out there writing 8 or 10 hours a day. My full-time writing is probably a 4 hour a day gig. So I have lots of time to do things. I've been planting a lot of things this year. I planted some hydrangeas. I'm getting ready to plant some rose bushes, and just kind of working around my yard, doing that. But I don't really have a ton of hobbies. I love to read, so I read a lot when I'm not doing that. Spend time with my wife. We usually binge watch a TV show. We're really into The Voice right now, which is, you probably don't think about science fiction author, but we just really like it. So
great. So what does your writing space look like? And what do you need to have around you when you're writing or editing?
As little as possible. I write on a desktop, on a pretty empty desk, messy, but empty, in a pretty bare room. I don't like music while I'm writing. The fewer distractions I have, the better for me. So I try to really, to keep it pretty basic. But I'm sitting at my desk right now. You can see the back, back behind me. This is here I go. This is the pretty much, that's copies. Those are my covers on the wall. That's about it. Probably shouldn't have done that, but anyway, that's my, it's very basic.
Great. And do you write on a laptop or a desktop, or do you write on a notebook?
I'm a desktop. I have a desktop. I do have a laptop in case I'm going somewhere and I need to write while I'm there. But even then, I'm going to take my full-size keyboard. But most of my writing happens at my desk.
Okay. And writers often have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions to help them through their work. And do you have any, and what do you have, and do they help you or hinder you while you're writing?
My wife has a cat. And I say my wife has a cat because both my wife and the cat would agree that it's my wife's cat. The cat and I have a very good relationship. I don't mess with it. It doesn't mess with me. Although she was meowing outside the door. I don't know if you could hear it. Right about 3:00 every day, she will start, if my wife isn't home, and my wife's not home right now, the cat gets fed at 4. And around 3, we'll start making noise because it's time for me to go feed her. So that's really the only time where the cat is a distraction. But other than that, it's a big house. She's got plenty of space.
Okay. And do you have any favorite foods or drinks or that must be in your vicinity while you're writing or editing?
I just drink water. I'll have a cup of tea. I quit coffee about a year ago for medical reasons. And so I'll have a cup of tea in the morning to try and get me going. But then in the afternoon, I do most of my writing in the afternoons. And it's just water, which it's right here.
It's funny because all the authors have to show me their water.
Yeah, it's just a regular old plastic cup. Probably a 40 cent cup.
And has New England played any part in any of your books? And since they're out in space, in Colonyside or whatever, I would assume they don't play any part. But
I'm trying to think. I do pull from places where I've been for setting sometimes, and I'm just trying to think if I got any New England stuff. No, I don't. I should. Maybe I'll write that into another book sometime. I've got Afghanistan in one book. I've got Colorado in a book. I definitely have Georgia in a book, The Swamps, in book 4. But I'm trying to, not really. No.
Okay.
There may be a scene in book 4 that's more Germany than New England, but a lot of Germany looks like New England. But it's been so long since I've been in the snow that I don't know what I would do. I don't know how I would write that.
Okay. So I have just two more questions for you.
Sure.
One is, where can people find your work, aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, of course?
Yeah, absolutely. Annie's Bookstop of Worcester would be a good place to find it. Or if you're in Savannah, E. Shaver Bookstore is my local independent bookstore, that you can find them there. But really anywhere where you buy books. I mean, it's on the shelf at that big store that people, that independent bookstores probably don't like very much. And then that online store that independent bookstores don't like very much. But if you can, buy it at your indie, because it's the same price. It's the same price. If you walk into Annie's, my book is going to be $7.99. And if you order it from an online mega store, it's going to be $7.99. So, buy local.
Actually, I do have to put a plug in here, because Annie's is usually, we usually sell it for less than $7.99. We usually have a discount on our new books.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah, so buy it from Annie's. You can call us at 508-796-5613 to order the books, or orders at anniesbooksworcester.com, and send us email, and we'll send you the books. So just a little plug for Annie's. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I've been trying to order all my books indie, really since the pandemic started. I don't know that people understand quite how hard bookstores have been hit by this event, but yeah. It's not great. And independent bookstores staying in business is good for everybody. Authors, readers.
Yeah. Booksellers.
Booksellers. Yeah. I mean, obviously for them, but for us too. I mean, the more we get consolidated down to only having a couple of places to sell books, the harder, I guess, is an author.
Yeah. Okay, my last question for you is, how can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
I am at michaelmammay.com is my website. I'm Michael Mammay on Twitter, Michael Mammay on Facebook. It's really, really not that hard. It's the same. If you Google my name, you'll find all my stuff is really. I was not on social media until I started writing. So I branded all my stuff with my name. And there's only one other person with my name in the whole country. I signed a book for him. So we're related somehow. We can't even figure it out. So.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Michael, for interviewing with us. I really enjoyed it. Me. And we will hopefully sometime see you at the store.
I would love to get up there. I'm actually thinking about maybe in late summer, early fall, assuming I can get my vaccine, making a trip up the East Coast. There are a couple of places I want to stop at along the way. But, Worcester sits right there on that 495 interchange. And
pretty close.
Yeah, 495 and Route 3 there going up into New Hampshire. So I can't see a way where I wouldn't be driving through. So we'll see what we can do.
That would be wonderful. All right. Thanks again. And we will be seeing you.
All righty.
Bye.
Bye.